What if I told you that within the depths of your biology there exists a silent language, one that speaks louder than words, louder than desire, louder than even love itself? A language written not in sound, but in scent, in energy, in the subtle magnetic pull between the masculine and the feminine. It begins not with action, but with restraint. And this is where the mystery unfolds. There is an ancient force that few modern men understand. It is not found in conquest or consumption, but in conservation. Semen retention, the deliberate act of preserving one's vital essence, is not merely about discipline. It is the alchemical fire that transforms the base into the noble. From this fire emerges a psychic aroma, a pheromonal presence that cannot be faked, replicated, or masked. It is as if nature herself rewards the man who resists with an invisible crown that others, especially women, can sense, even without knowing why. Carl Jung taught us that the unconscious mind governs far more than we realize, that archetypes, instincts, and primordial energies shape our behavior long before reason arrives. So what happens when a man refuses to drain his essence frivolously? He awakens an archetype, not just the lover, but the king. His posture changes, his voice deepens, his eyes grow still, and the women around him feel it. Not because they're told, but because evolution whispers it in their blood. Here is a man who has not scattered his seed, but transmuted it into power. Pheromones, these unseen messengers, are not merely chemical tricks. They are biological echoes of the psyche. When a man retains, his testosterone recalibrates, his hormonal signature sharpens, and his scent, yes, even his scent, evolves. He no longer smells like desperation. He no longer feels like lack. He exudes potential, the promise of protection, creation, direction. Not chaos, not neediness, but order. The feminine psyche, always attuned to symbols of security and strength, responds like a tuning fork to this signal. But deeper than biology lies the shadow. And here, Jung would press us to look inward. Why does the modern man resist retention? Because he fears his own power. He is addicted to release because it is the easiest escape from the responsibility of becoming. Semen retention is not a moral commandment. It is a psychological crucible. It forces the man to face his desires, his shame, his wounds, and transmute them. Every moment he holds that energy within, he is building a new ego, forged not by society's standards, but by his own emerging self. And what of attraction? It is no longer a performance. It becomes a gravitational field. Women are not drawn to retained men because of gimmicks or tactics, but because such a man walks differently through the world. He does not chase, he radiates, he does not beg for attention, he commands it, not through words, but through presence, being. The pheromones tell the truth. This is a man in control of his appetites, therefore, he can be trusted with life. In the final analysis, the mystery of semen retention is not just chemical, or spiritual, or psychological. It is all of them. It is a return to the masculine principle that modernity has tried to domesticate, and in that return a forgotten power re-emerges, primal, disciplined, and deeply, deeply attractive. There exists a current in the unconscious mind, a deep, ancient river that runs beneath the surface of our modern identities. It carries with it the symbols, instincts, and psychic imprints of all the men who came before us. In Jungian terms, this is the realm of the archetypes, the timeless collective patterns of human experience. And among them, the masculine archetypes stand like silent giants, the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover. But in today's fractured world, most men live in exile from these inner figures, detached from their own primal core. Semen retention is not merely a behavioral practice, it is the bridge back to those archetypes. When a man withholds his seed, he is not just exercising control over his biology, he is reawakening a psychic order that has long been neglected. In Jungian psychology, libido is not merely a sexual force, it is the raw energy of life, creativity, and transformation. Every time a man chooses retention over release, he redirects this libido back into the self. He feeds the inner archetypes. The king gains clarity. The warrior grows resolve. The magician sharpens perception. The lover becomes deep, still, and magnetic. Women do not respond to retention consciously. They respond to the man who has become inhabited by something larger than himself. The man who practices semen retention unknowingly undergoes a psychological initiation. Without ceremony or rite, he enters the path of individuation, the process of becoming whole. He withdraws his projection from the outer world and begins to harness the energy that was once spilled unconsciously. This act changes his field, his presence. It is not a metaphor when we say women sense something different. They are reacting to a shift in the man's psychic atmosphere, a reordering of energies that resonate with the deepest feminine instincts, attraction to strength, to containment, to direction. The retained man is no longer governed by the compulsions of the lower instincts. He does not chase, he does not flatter, he does not perform, he simply is. He walks into a room and the room adjusts. He speaks and silence follows. This is not arrogance, it is archetypal authority. The king does not ask for attention. His presence demands it without effort. Women feel this because within their own unconscious, the archetype of the queen is always searching for the king. Not a boy, not a man driven by lust, but a man who has mastered his lust and transmuted it into poise, purpose, and potency. This magnetism is not manipulation. It is not game or technique. It is a return, a homecoming. When the masculine psyche reclaims its throne, it radiates coherence, and coherence is attractive. Not in the shallow sense of looks or fashion, but in the deep, wordless language that speaks from the bones of one soul to another. Women may not know why they feel drawn to such a man, but they feel it. And the reason is simple. He has stopped leaking his power. He has stopped escaping himself. He has chosen to contain, and in that containment, he becomes a vessel for the masculine archetype in its purest form. This is not about suppression. Jung would warn us that anything repressed returns as a shadow. No, this is integration. The retained man does not deny his sexual nature. He absorbs it. He allows it to inform him, fuel him, but not govern him. His desire no longer bursts outward in a need to possess. It deepens inward as a source of radiance. In this state, he becomes aligned with the archetypal masculine, structured, grounded, generative. And this alignment speaks a language older than words, a signal that is both psychic and biochemical, the language of pheromones, posture, gaze, and presence. In truth, the man who retains is not just practicing a discipline. He is undergoing metamorphosis. He is dissolving the false self, the addicted, compulsive, approval-seeking persona, and allowing the archetypal masculine to emerge from the unconscious. This emergence is not subtle. It changes everything. How he walks, how he speaks, how others, especially women, respond to him, because they are no longer responding to a man alone. They are responding to a man who has become a vessel for something timeless, powerful, and whole, The alchemy of desire, transmuting sexual energy into pheromonal power through semen retention. There is a force inside every man that he barely understands, a fire, ancient and untamed, that pulses beneath his skin and mind. It is the force of desire, of creation, of life itself. But make no mistake, this is not just about attracting others. This is about transformation from within. The sexual energy that once created chaos now creates coherence. The man becomes aligned with himself. His thoughts match his actions match his purpose. And this alignment generates an unmistakable frequency, the frequency of a man who has turned his desire inward, refined it, and emerged not smaller, but larger, not depleted, but overflowing with presence. Pheromones of the psyche, the unseen language of semen retention and female intuition. There is a language that precedes words. A communication older than civilization, older than myth, older even than thought. It moves beneath the threshold of conscious awareness, carried not through speech but through scent, energy, posture, and presence. It is the silent conversation between masculine and feminine, an exchange taking place in the realm of instinct, intuition, and unconscious response. Carl Jung called attention to these unseen layers of reality, the deep structures of the psyche that shape behavior without our knowing. And in this hidden realm, pheromones are not merely chemical signals. They are the biological echoes of the psyche's condition. They are the scent of a man's inner state. When a man practices semen retention, he alters his psychological and physiological field, not through force, but through conservation. The energy that would have been expelled is now contained, and this containment sends signals, some hormonal, some behavioral, and some entirely invisible to the eye but deeply felt by those around him, most notably, women. The feminine intuition, always attuned to subtle shifts in masculine presence, detects something different in the retained man. She cannot explain it. She does not need to. Her body responds before her mind has time to catch up. There is a sense of density in him, of inner gravity, of magnetism without performance, and this perception is triggered in part by pheromones shaped by the psyche. Pheromones are not passive. They are chemical signatures of a man's hormonal environment, influenced by testosterone levels, stress hormones, and emotional states. Semen retention directly affects these levels. It increases testosterone naturally. It lowers the frantic oscillations of cortisol. It stabilizes the nervous system. Over time, this creates a new baseline in the man's biology, one that sends out different messages into the environment. He no longer smells of need, depletion, or desperation. He smells of vitality, of control, of unexpressed potential. These are not abstract traits. They are measurable, tangible, and deeply connected to how women perceive him at the level of instinct. But this perception is not simply chemical. It is archetypal. Jung taught us that the unconscious is structured around symbols and archetypes that transcend time and culture. The feminine psyche carries within it a resonance with the masculine archetype, the king, the warrior, the magician, and it is constantly, though unconsciously, searching for their reflection in the outer world. A man who retains begins to embody these archetypes, not because he imitates them, but because the discipline of retention forces a confrontation with the shadow and a rise into psychic integration. His body begins to match his inner structure. His posture mirrors his discipline. His scent mirrors his containment. His energy mirrors his self-possession, and women feel it. Female intuition is not merely emotional sensitivity. It is evolutionary intelligence, refined across millennia to detect strength, safety, and direction in potential mates. The retained man does not have to prove these traits. He exudes them. His pheromones carry the truth of his self-control. His stillness carries the truth of his clarity. His gaze carries the truth of his sovereignty. These cues speak directly to the unconscious feminine, bypassing rational filters, creating a sense of curiosity, intrigue, and trust without explanation. The woman may not know why she is drawn, but the body knows, the psyche knows. She is reading the signal that this man holds his energy rather than spills it. In a world flooded with overstimulation, cheap attention, and empty performance, this kind of presence becomes rare and therefore powerful. The retained man does not chase. He draws in, not by effort, but by coherence. His inner state is not fragmented. It is aligned. His energy does not push outward recklessly. It moves inward, creating a depth that others feel but cannot define. Jung might say he is becoming more whole, and in this wholeness, his essence becomes more concentrated, more aromatic, more archetypally masculine. The pheromones become the scent of integration. The woman's intuition responds not just to biology, but to the signal of a psyche that is no longer in conflict with itself. This is the deeper truth of attraction. It is not built on tactics or surface behavior. It is rooted in ancient codes that the body still obeys. When a man retains, he sends a signal into the collective field, one that speaks the language of discipline, focus, self-possession. The feminine responds not because she is told to, but because her biology and unconscious recognize something rare and real. A man who is full, not empty. A man who is stable, not scattered. A man who has turned his energy inward and in doing so has become a beacon without speaking a single word. Shadow work in sexual mastery. Why semen retention unlocks a man's deepest magnetic force? There is a place within every man that he avoids. A hidden chamber in the psyche where his unresolved fears, compulsions, insecurities, and unexpressed pain lie buried. Carl Jung called this the shadow, not evil but unconscious, not wrong but repressed. And it is from this shadow that so much of a man's sexual energy leaks, not just through his body but through his behavior, his choices, his relationships. The man who cannot confront his shadow is a man governed by it. His lust becomes an escape, not a connection. His desire becomes frantic, not focused. His presence becomes hollow, no matter how confident he tries to appear. Semen retention forces a confrontation with this shadow. Not symbolically, viscerally. In the absence of release, the man begins to feel everything he once avoided. The cravings, the restlessness, the agitation, these are not simply biological urges. They are the surfacing of psychic material long left unexamined. Each wave of desire brings with it the deeper truth that most men are not in control of their sexuality. They are possessed by it. Retention is not easy because it initiates this battle within. The man must wrestle with his fragmented self. But this is the path toward mastery, not avoidance. Through semen retention, a man begins to learn the art of containment, not as suppression, but as integration. Containment means becoming the vessel strong enough to hold one's fire without being consumed by it. In Jungian psychology, this is the process of individuation, becoming whole by bringing the unconscious into consciousness. The sexual urge is not something to be feared or repressed. It is a teacher. It reveals where the psyche is fractured. It exposes where the man is leaking power. Every time he chooses retention, he is choosing to hold his gaze on the chaos within, and in doing so begins to transform it. This transformation is not abstract. It reshapes his body, his energy, his presence. The energy that once escaped in moments of weakness now condenses within him, creating intensity. His voice deepens, not just in sound, but in resonance. His walk changes, more grounded, deliberate. His eyes sharpen, not predatory, but aware. This new coherence within the self becomes magnetic. And what draws others, especially women, is not the suppression of desire, but the ownership of it. The man is no longer begging for connection. He has become connection. He no longer seeks the feminine to fill a void. He meets her from fullness. This is the root of sexual mastery, not performance. This is the root of sexual mastery, not technique. Mastery means becoming the authority over one's own energy. It means understanding that lust is not the goal. It is the doorway. Behind it lies power, intuition, vision, and presence. The man who walks through that door without flinching becomes rare. And the feminine, attuned to what is real and what is false, feels that rarity. Women sense the difference between the man who has integrated his shadow and the one who is still running from it. One chases, the other draws in. One needs, the other holds. As the man continues this path, his entire psychic structure begins to rewire. The addiction to stimulation fades. The need for approval quiets. The nervous energy of proving himself dissolves. In its place grows stillness, the kind of stillness that can hold space, witness emotion, and remain centered under pressure. This stillness is deeply attractive because it signals safety, not passive safety, but grounded leadership. The shadow, once denied, is now integrated, and with it comes access to the primal forces of the masculine psyche: clarity, decisiveness, depth, and unshakable presence. This shift becomes visible not only in the man's demeanor, but in the energetic field around him. People feel it. Women feel it more. The very same energy that once scattered into the void now gathers, radiates, and influences. His presence becomes thick with intention. His body begins to produce hormonal signals that reflect inner balance. Testosterone tempered by awareness, libido directed by purpose. Emit. This chemical reality is matched by a psychic signal. The woman senses not just a body, but a container, a force, a man who has walked into his shadow and emerged with his fire intact. In this state, attraction is no longer about validation or conquest. It is about recognition. The feminine recognizes the man who has mastered himself, not in loud declarations but in quiet command. His sexuality does not spill outward in desperate search. It simmers inward, feeding his drive, his vision, his creativity. The shadow is no longer the enemy. It is the forge. And out of that forge steps a man who no longer needs to be told who he is. His energy speaks it for him. The libido as life force. Carl Jung, semen retention, and the return of the integrated masculine at the center of Jungian psychology lies a truth often misunderstood by the modern world. That libido is not just sexual energy, but the total life force of the psyche. It is the energy that animates thought, drives action, fuels dreams, and shapes the very core of one's being. Jung saw libido not as a base, carnal urge to be tamed or denied, but as a sacred current capable of creation or destruction, depending on how it is channeled. For most men, this force remains fractured, poured out in compulsive habits, scattered through stimulation, wasted in fleeting pleasure. The integrated man, however, learns to contain and direct it. Semen retention becomes the crucible through which this integration begins. When a man chooses retention, he is not merely holding back a physical release. He is reversing the flow of his inner world. The libido, instead of moving outward and dissolving into momentary gratification, begins to cycle inward, nourishing the structures of the self. This is a psychological and energetic inversion, where once the man moved toward escape, now he moves toward embodiment. The libido, now uncaged, begins to reveal its true nature, not just as sexual fuel, but as the raw material of transformation. In this state, a man begins to build rather than burn. He begins to generate rather than grasp. The integrated masculine is not a cultural construct. It is a psychic reality. It is what emerges when the ego no longer fights the unconscious, but aligns with it. Semen retention forces this process because it confronts the man with his own undirected power. The same energy that could destroy him in addiction can now become the force that refines his character, fuels his vision, and awakens his intuition. The libido becomes the great bridge between instinct and spirit, and the man who retains begins to walk that bridge. In Jungian terms, this is the journey of individuation. The man is no longer ruled by archetypes unconsciously, the lover, the warrior, the orphan, the trickster, but begins to consciously embody them in balance. The retained libido makes this possible. It gives him the fuel to do the inner work, the clarity to observe himself without judgment, and the resilience to face his shadow without collapse. His inner world stabilizes. He becomes less reactive. The need for external validation weakens. And as this happens, his presence in the outer world begins to change, not by force, but by resonance. A man whose libido has been reintegrated into the totality of his being becomes an anomaly in a culture of distraction. He does not chase because he has nothing to chase. He has become the source. The same energy that once pulled him outward into fantasy now roots him in reality. His creativity expands. His thinking becomes sharp, layered, and penetrating. His intuition, the feminine aspect within the masculine, awakens. The man begins to feel his way through the world with a kind of silent confidence that cannot be taught, only cultivated. Women feel this. People feel this because life force has a frequency, and his is no longer leaking. It is concentrated, stable, and aligned. This life force, this retained libido, also reshapes the man biologically. His hormones regulate. Testosterone, the architect of masculine presence, rises not just in number but in impact. The body begins to communicate this change through scent, voice, posture, and micro-expression. These are not shallow markers. They are the outer symbols of an inner transformation. They are the physical manifestations of a psyche that is no longer fragmented, no longer at war with itself. The man becomes coherent, and coherence is rare. In a fragmented world, coherence becomes irresistibly attractive, especially to the feminine, which seeks containment and polarity. The feminine is naturally drawn to the integrated masculine because he provides what the unconscious feminine craves: structure, direction, and depth. Not control, but clarity. Not dominance, but embodiment. The man whose libido has been transmuted through retention no longer seeks women to resolve his disconnection. He meets them from wholeness. He offers not a grasping need, but a grounded invitation. Eat. And this invitation is felt not through words, but through the field he carries. A field that has been charged by discipline, refined by self-awareness, and energized by the choice to hold and transform rather than release and forget. Jung believed that modern man was spiritually starving, disconnected from the archetypal depths of his own psyche, lost in a maze of ego, distraction, and unconscious projection. Semen retention becomes an act of rebellion against this disconnection. It becomes a symbolic and literal return to the self. It gathers all the scattered pieces of masculine energy and reassembles them into something coherent, sovereign, and magnetic. The man no longer orbits around desire. Desire orbits around him. Not because he manipulates, but because he is, because his very being now radiates the fullness of contained life force.